Welcome, everyone, to the Jake Dunlap Show. This is your weekly dose of real success stories from entrepreneurs, athletes, celebrities, CEOs, and the people that you love. If you've ever wondered what makes people tick, what are the weird things that happened to them in their past that help to shape the people that they've became, every Thursday at 8 a.m. Eastern, you can tune in and get exactly that. The behind the scenes, not the typical behind the scenes, but the real stories that shape some of the people that you know, love, and follow. All right, welcome everyone to another episode of the Jake Dunlap Show. Today's guest, all right, this guy's been hustling since he was 8. Right, he was growing vegetables in his backyard, going door to door, selling them to his neighbors. In high school, this guy was ahead of the game, where he posted an ad for an old history textbook and then managed to sell it for $50 within 2 days, and then took that business to college and started nathansbooks.com to develop a new passion for e-commerce as well. Afterwards, he went into family business. His family has been in the textile business. It was funny. We were talking about it before, and he was like, "It's my great grandfather or great great." He's like, "I don't know." I'm like, "However many 175 years of great grand or great greats there are," and now is the CEO of Boardroom Socks, which manufactures high quality men's dress socks knit in North Carolina. Shout out to North Carolina. He's also was on the bass team in college, so we're going to have to get into that too. But everyone, please, please join me in welcoming Mr. Nathan James. Nathan, thank you for joining me.
Yeah, thanks so much for the opportunity, Jake. I appreciate it. And let's skip the bass questions because that career fizzled out pretty quickly.
Yeah, the Elon bass fishing team. I love it, man.
Yeah,
So you're going to have to give me some
that was a lot of fun.
Tips and tricks there. So just like every episode, we kind of go back to the beginning. Just talk a little bit about some kind of memories you have growing up. Obviously, your family was were business owners, right? They were running their thing, so you had that kind of influence. You obviously were kind of coming up with side hustles, etc. What were some big lessons or memories you have early on and growing up from your parents, or things that really stuck with you around business, entrepreneurship?
Yeah, I think I was really fortunate in how my parents raised my brother and I, in that they were both entrepreneurs, and they were very willing to let us kind of run with ideas. And for example, you mentioned the growing tomatoes in the backyard and selling those to the neighbors. Well, sometimes I was picking my mom's tomatoes and selling my mom's tomatoes to the neighbors and whatnot. And another business I had was in the front of my dad's warehouse. I opened up a little store, and I would advertise it in the newspaper and put signs up on the road. And I'd be selling all kinds of trinkets and stuff that I didn't even know what it was, all kinds of different things. Whatever I could get my hands on and try to sell, I would sell in there. And sometimes it was stuff out of our house too. I'd take extra furniture out of the attic and stuff. So my parents were always very accommodating. And I think that's one of the big things, is just that they gave me a pretty long leash to try to figure out things and get knowledge and experience on my own, and learn the hard way sometimes. And then I was also very fortunate with my textbook business, as you mentioned, that they once I started running out of money, I was buying as many books as I could get my hands on. My dad, I had to sit him down and kind of walk him through my business plan and what I had in mind, and I was able to convince him to lend me some money, which helped me get the business going. But it's almost like in terms of just takeaways and kind of early things that you learn. I think it goes back to what you and I were talking about earlier. I think before we hit record there, that there's no shortcut, and there's no easy button or hack or anything. It was just grit and determination. And I think that's something I've always picked up from my family is, I think my dad's about to turn 72 this year, still works probably 7 days a week and owns a few different companies, and just is a really hard worker and a grinder, and that's just how I've always been raised. And I think that's that's the big thing that I learned growing up and early in my own kind of entrepreneurial pursuits is there's really no easy way or shortcut. You've just got to sit down and grind and apply yourself and do the best you can and be very persistent and work really hard. And um, it's not the sexy kind of headline, but that's it's just grit and determination.
Yeah. It's like we were talking before. I said, look, if there was a cheat button, like nobody would tell you to work hard. They would say, yeah, just do this other thing. But unfortunately, there are
Right.
times, whenever like that, the answer is that, or perseverance or focus. And we'll talk a little bit about that. And then, you make the move to go to Elon. So go to college at Elon. And what I think is cool is like, you're one of the few people, with a professional sales concentration, for your degree. And so, what was it about, that major, marketing and finance, but, kind of focused on sales? What was it that kind of drew you to that? Which is, again, most people, they majored in philosophy and now they're, a business owner, and, it's not as applicable where you kind of went the more practical route.
I think that it was really interesting. And I think a lot of what rubbed off on me was when I was at Elon, um, the different professors that were involved with that program. And it's funny, I had a marketing professor who was outstanding. I had him for three different classes. And I remember he gave us kind of a talk one day about what his background and what qualified him to be up in front of the room teaching us. And the way he always explained it was there are two kinds of professors. There is AQ, academically qualified, and then there is PQ, professionally qualified. And he said, I'm PQ. I was in business. I've been in business my whole career. I've been in sales, and I'm not going to stand up here and teach out of a textbook. I'm going to give you real life examples and teach you for the real world. And a lot of the knowledge and information that he shared, just all around sales and marketing, and it was just so applicable and hands on and real world that I think it really opened up my eyes to it doesn't really matter what job you're doing. At some point, you're always selling. You're selling something. You're selling yourself. Um, Everything kind of comes back to sales at some point at the most fundamental level. And um, I think it was just an awesome program at Elon, in that there were a lot of real world professional salespeople um, that weren't, PhDs necessarily, that had learned the textbook. They had been out and had a very successful career and retired, and just started to teach and do sales teaching because they wanted to, and they were really good at it and passionate about it. And that's definitely what drew me to the program. And I'm glad I did that.
Yeah, I mean, I think it's an interesting one. I feel like I've had, Guy Kawasaki, other folks on the show, and he was just, the thing that he said about, he's like, everybody should, do sales at some extent, to some extent, to be a, successful, entrepreneur, etc. Like just having that, that gear, or learning, more and more about it, I think is just such a critical piece. It's just another one of those things that it's just really difficult, especially early on, to outsource. That we see companies try to do it all the time, and then they're like, "Well, she or he didn't figure it out." It's like, well, because you just threw him to the wolves, and there's a process and other things. And another cool fact about you got a chance to study abroad in Cuba, and like in the islands. What took you to Cuba?
Yeah, that was interesting. That was a pretty eye-opening experience. That was my first time going out of the country to a kind of third world country, and it was interesting. The program was partially in Cuba and then partially in the Cayman Islands, and that's about as polar opposite as you can get socioeconomically. And it's just pretty eye-opening, the difference between those two. And a lot of the course was about how does government's involvement in business and different regulations and the political landscape impact business. And yeah, it was really interesting. It was very eye opening. And Caymans were beautiful. Cuba was beautiful, but not quite sure I'd go back to Cuba. But it was an interesting experience. And coming back from a trip like that really opens your eyes and makes you realize how much you have to be thankful for in this country and how great of a life, we're fortunate enough to live.
Yeah, it's a good. I mean, especially for you, you've kind of grown up and been around like similar area, around North Carolina go to school in North Carolina. So I can imagine it's pretty impactful. It's like for me, I grew up in the Midwest and in Missouri, and I remember when I graduated college, I went to Florida, got a chance to like interact with all kinds of different people, and I'm like, whoa, like these people are different. Like this is this is not this, yeah. But okay, so you mentioned it briefly here. So you were the vice president of the bass fishing team though, right? And I think that this is fascinating to me. So the bass fishing team. So for those people who don't know, tell a little bit about like what goes into a fishing competition. I've seen it on TV. Maybe some people have seen it on TV. Because your big finish was the ninth place finish at Lake Guntersville, Alabama, right? That was one of them. I told you we are going to go back in time. So I told you, Nathan, that we're gonna pull out all the stops here. So what goes into a bass fishing tournament?
Yeah, that's a great question. And I didn't really know that this was a thing. I mean, I've always been into fishing. It's something my family and I have done for a long time, ever since I was a little kid. But yeah, so the way a fishing tournament works is you can keep 5 fish in the live well of the boat. And so at any given time, it's your 5 biggest fish. And then at the end of the tournament, you weigh your 5 biggest fish. Hopefully, you caught 5 fish. Not every time you catch 5 fish. And you weigh your 5 biggest fish, and then everybody else weighs them, and the winner is the heaviest weight. So yeah, it's kind of an interesting. No, it's not that complex, but it sounds easy. But sometimes you get out there like that tournament actually in Lake Guntersville. I remember that was the coldest I've ever been in my entire life. You think Alabama, you know, not cold, anything like that. It's warm down in the deep south. Well, it was in February. It was like the air temperature must have been just below freezing because it was snowing, and a bass boat does not have a windshield. So you're sitting there in an open hull bass boat going 60 to 70 miles an hour in the snow. And yeah, it's like driving in a convertible in the snow without a windshield. I mean, that's the coldest I've ever been. But we did well. We came at night. So that was great.
So that was and you decided to not pursue a career as a on the Bassmasters tour. You know what? And then obviously again, you've done some digital at this point. You're running your own, kind of running a business as well too on the textbook side. What I guess like what kind of led you to? I guess did you always know that you would kind of work in the family business, or did you have maybe like another thought in mind? Because I know you didn't start the company till a little bit later.
Right. Yeah. I mean, I think it's almost like Boardroom Socks was the perfect culmination of a lot of my interests. You highlighted the multiple generations in textiles that's been in my family. My dad, he's been in textiles now for, gosh, close to 50 years probably. And then his dad and my grandfather, just everybody in our family has been in textiles for so long. And that definitely played an element in it. And also just my interest in entrepreneurship and working for myself. And then the third element that drew me into it was the digital marketing component. And so I think Boardroom Socks was just kind of like the perfect storm of those three things, like the family history, entrepreneurship, and digital marketing. And it just kind of all culminated in Boardroom Socks. And it just perfectly aligned everything that I was interested in and wanted to pursue, and has really turned out to be a dream come true.
Yeah, and how did you land on socks though? Right, out of all the things, what was it that was like, I'm going to be the socks guy. I'm gonna be the guy to do it. I mean, look, there's a million. There's a lot of opportunity there. And if you go to the web, they'll obviously link to the website. Whenever I was looking before, I'm like, I didn't even know that there were this many options for socks. Like, I didn't know that there are all these different types of over the calf and mid calf, etc. Types of socks. So, how is it that you got into that world in particular?
Yeah, that's a great question. So it all goes back to I got to give the credit to my dad on that one, because initially I thought he and my mom were kind of nuts when they first came up with this idea. Um, so my dad had worn for years and years a just a classic black merino wool over the calf dress sock, and he always got them locally made, and just being plugged into the textile community, he always knew the people that made them and where they came from and whatnot. And in the late 90s and early 2000s, when a lot of textile manufacturing started going offshore and mills were closing here in North Carolina, my dad just kind of was thinking one day, he was like, well, you know what? I know how these socks are made. I know where to get the materials to make them. I know pretty much everything about them. Why don't I just make my own? And it started as really a hobby more than anything else. He started making the socks for his personal use, and then some of his friends started asking about them, and then it just kind of snowballed and grew organically. And like I said, I thought he was nuts when he first came up with this. I didn't see a product market fit. I didn't understand it. And then, fast forward a few years, and my parents had started it out of the attic of their house. And I remember when I was leaving my kind of corporate day job to jump into this full time, and I'd always been working in it, on nights and weekends and everything for several years. But when I left my day job to start working at Boardroom Socks full time and to really run the company, I remember one of the first things I did was to move move the business out of their house and into a warehouse. And I had to count all the socks that were in their house. And I rented a big box truck and everything. And it was over 15,000 pairs of socks that they had in their house. I mean, everywhere. It doesn't, like, any bedroom, the dining room. I mean, the socks were just everywhere. And that was pretty humbling. Just thinking back to how I kind of used to argue with them when they were first thinking up this idea for the business, and I just didn't see the product market fit. And then it certainly has proven itself. That was pretty humbling to move all those boxes, but yeah, it's been an interesting journey, that's for sure.
That's funny because you're still their son, right? Like, you still, like, look,
Yeah.
yeah, you might be running the thing, but, like, son, go pick the box up. Go move 15,000 socks. So what were some of, like, what are some early lessons, from the first few years that you remember with the business? So that your parents kind of get this thing moving. You come in to kind of, take it to the next step. Obviously, like you said, you've got this digital marketing experience as well too. Like, what are some early memories you have around, like, starting to scale in, like, the early, first few years?
Yeah, I think that's a great question. I think we've been doing a lot of introspection on that, and I know you and I mentioned this a little bit, and we're chatting about this a little bit before we started recording. But I think a lot of it is just really focusing on figuring out the basics and the fundamentals. And I mentioned the product market fit, and I think once we understood the product and the customer and how all of that fit together, and who our customer was and how they used the product. And it sounds really elementary and basic, and the customer wears the sock, but it's, do you really know who the customer is and who you're targeting, and how they wear the sock, what they wear it with, and how you can take that ideal customer and go and find more of them. And that was really the key, is when we first understood the product market fit um, and where we fit into the marketplace. And we're definitely a niche product, and we've got a defined niche that we operate in. But I think that was the key, is figuring out what that niche was and who our customer was, and then pursuing that on a larger scale, and adding advertising and fuel to the fire. But you can't do any of those things until you figure out the fundamentals, and really understand the customer, and how you can serve that customer, and how only you can really uniquely serve that customer compared to all the other
How'd you learn
competitors
that?
and
Yeah,
options
how
that
did
are
you
out
go
there.
about that exercise, right? I think a lot of people, when they start a business, there's a lot of assumptions, right? And that's okay, right? Sometimes that's all you got, right? Is assumptions and maybe a little bit of market research. But like, what was that process like? Do you remember what it was like when you were doing was it, sir, like, how did you go about like really honing in on like, this is who our buyer is?
Yeah, I think it's the way it started out was kind of almost like a shotgun approach, right? We had a sock, we had this product, we knew people liked it, and we just tried everything we could to get it out into the world. And eventually you start to get a little bit of success, and then you see, okay, well, this person has ordered from us a couple of times, and then can we call this person and talk to them? Can we email them? Can we find out who they are, or more about what it is that they like about the socks? And that's almost the benefit, really. And I think that's where small businesses have, in a way, kind of an unfair advantage, is you're so connected and so close to the customer. Because I mean, for us, like, you call the 1-800 number and you're going to get somebody in our family who's going to answer the phone, most likely, because we're a small business. And I think that's part of what makes us so great compared to other larger companies that have so many different layers. And once you go talk to somebody in the marketing department, well, how far removed are they from the end user, and when's the last time that that person in the marketing department has actually sat down and talked on the phone or face to face with the customer? And so I think that's what really helped us, is the fact that we are so small and so directly connected to customers. And we would take orders over the phone, and call customers and email customers, and find out more about who they are, and what they like about the socks, what they don't like about the socks, and what, when they're shopping for products like ours, what is most important to them. And then can we take those findings and then hone our marketing messaging to better reflect that, so that we're speaking their language, and we're talking with them about what they're interested in and what they're looking for. And so I think that was the key, was really, and again, it's not, there's no hack or sexy shortcut there, but it's just talking with the customer and finding out where we really exceed, and what we're good at, and then pursuing that.
Yeah, and I think even just like some of the things, it's like, again, we've talked about this, um, you know, multiple times, but talking to the customer, I think it's one of those things where, sometimes it can be scary or nerve wracking, but like, look, if you really are invested and you care, like it's the only way, to talk to customers, to understand what they're trying to, kind of go through and accomplish. And it sounds like you guys did a really good job of that, very early. And as you kind of started to, the business continues to grow, you and I are talking about kind of, leading the company in this next kind of phase. And, the concept of like staying focused, not going, an inch wide, what is it, inch wide, mile long, or so, I don't remember what the saying is, but everyone knows what the saying, where you're doing like 50 different things, like at 10% versus, 3 things at 100. And, how do you think about, as your business is growing and scaling, like, how do you think about staying focused, and how do you think about bringing that? Because I have to imagine in a business like yours, there's some very logical other things that you could start to offer, right? If you think about like, who am I thinking of? Like bonobos, right? Bonobos, at first they were just pants, right? Wasn't like just, yeah. And then they, you can kind of branch out to other things. So how have you, as you think about kind of where the economy is and other things, like how do you kind of keep the business focused and run it effectively?
Yeah, and that's a great question. And that's something that we've been spending, and myself personally been spending a tremendous amount of time thinking about and focusing on is where do we go from here, and how do we set the priorities and focus on the priorities, because it's so easy. I mentioned earlier the shiny penny syndrome, and I think again inherently entrepreneurs and business owners tend to have a little bit of ADD to them, and always be pursuing the next thing. And you may have friends that say, "Oh, you got to check out TikTok," or you may have somebody else that says you need to be doing Instagram Reels, or you may have on the B2B side, the big thing used to be cold calling is dead, and then you would have so many different people just say so many different things, and what works for one person may not work for you, and vice versa. And I think you have to figure out what you're good at and what your business is good at, and then really double down and triple down on that, and just relentlessly focus on that, and do the best you can to ignore the noise and just put your blinders on and focus on what you're good at. And then once you've mastered that, put a system or a process in place to manage it. And that's kind of where we're at right now is, okay, these things that we've done, that we've been good at, let's put a system and a process in place to manage it. Let's bring on other people to help us maintain that and continue that. Then we'll add new pieces, and then we'll focus on new things. And I think that's the challenge, but that's also the secret, is just discipline. You've got to be disciplined to ignore the noise, and uh, people may shower you with other things that, you got to do this, you got to do that, but really focus on what works for you, what works for your business, and double down on that and ignore the noise. You just have to be
How do you
disciplined.
stay that? Yeah, man. I mean, look, as a CEO of a services company too, which is almost even worse because then we're a service. I can literally just like make up something and sell it the next day. Like I feel like it's even worse. Um, how do you do that? Again, like how do you keep the focus, or how do you? And maybe it's actually a two-part question. How do you think about continuing to find passion and joy? And because a lot of times, like you said, entrepreneurs, I'm kind of a mix. I'm like a more of like the classic like visionary into like a not integrator who over the course of 9 years running a company has become more operation savvy. um how do you stay focused but also kind of like feed that side for what, and I guess it could be around like innovating processes or something, but how have you done that? How have you been able to stay focused and yet still, you know, continue to stay kind of motivated and, excited around, different things?
Yeah, and that can be tough and tricky. I think to answer the latter part there about staying motivated and excited and engaged, I think what's really helped me is finding the things that I do like doing, even if it's not something that I should necessarily be doing. Like, for example, writing some of the blog posts and articles and content on our website. For whatever reason, I've just always enjoyed doing that. So, I make sure that I have a little bit of time to do those sorts of things. And then other things that, I'm not necessarily the biggest fan of, try to find a way to delegate that out and put a process in place to manage that. So I think that helps. Another thing that has helped, and I guess it's a little different, having a physical product versus selling a service like yours. I think having a physical product and trying to stay as in touch with that as possible. I love going to the mill and just walking around the mill and seeing. I think for us, one of the most rewarding things, and the reason why we have really worked so hard in this business, is just a focus and a dedication on supporting local jobs and local manufacturing, in the face of all the headwinds and the offshoring that has just decimated the local textile industry. And I think that's always been one of our major motivating factors. And I think whenever you need, a little bit of a spark and to reignite that passion and motivation in the business, just going to the mill and walking around and seeing the jobs that we're helping to support. I mean, we're small business, but we still add up. And I think walking through the plant and seeing those things and seeing the jobs that we're helping to support, that's a big part of what keeps us going and keeps us motivated to dig in and keep working hard. But I think to stay disciplined and approaching discipline, I think it's tough. And in some ways, I think I'm still trying to figure that out. But what's really helped me is even just down to a very tactical level. I like every day before I go to the office, I like to make a list of, and I've got a Mac computer and I've got an iPhone, so it's all synced up. I've got a to-do list, and whenever I'm thinking and something randomly pops in my head, I'll add everything on there, and then next thing you know, I've got a to-do list that's a mile long, and I just have to correct myself and say, no, you're not going to get all of those things done. So what I've tried to do, and this has really helped me a lot, is I make a must accomplish list, and I try and make it as short as possible, and I make that every day or usually the night before I go into the office the next day, and I put half a dozen things or however many things it is that I just absolutely must accomplish. And I try and put some of the easy ones first, just so as soon as I get in the office, I knock those out and I feel good and start to get into momentum. But I think that's really helped me, again, just from a super tactical level of just making a to-do list and not making a giant never-ending to-do list, but also making something every day. And I again, discipline and habit. After doing it for a while, I'm just in the habit of it now. But every day before I go to the office or the night before, making that must accomplish list. And that just helps me kind of keep focused on, okay, this is what you've got to do tomorrow. And I think that's helped. And then just building a cadence around, whether you're a business owner or you work in a corporate gig or whatever it may be, I think you've got to have some kind of cadence or routine. And for us, what's really helped is every Friday, we have sort of a leadership meeting where we have a set agenda that's always the same agenda. And the only really things that are on that agenda are the things that are most important for us. What are the inventory levels? What's going on in production? And just forcing ourselves to only work on those items at that specific time. And so I think whatever the process is for you, and it's different for everybody, but you've got to find a way to give yourself that structure and cadence to keep you disciplined. Because if you can achieve that discipline and that focus, I think that's really what's going to help you be successful versus chasing after all kinds of different things, which is very easy to do.
Well, and I think it's easy, especially in today's day and age. There's so many small things to do, and we create these systems. I've talked about this before, where we want that we can find the little mini dopamine rushes by just banging out emails and doing those things. And what you realize is that's why so many people, at the end of the day, they're like, God, it's worked X hours and I feel like I didn't get anything done. And it's because you're consistently punting either the things that are hard. Maybe it's the things, if you kind of find yourself, these are the things that don't give you energy that, like you talked about, you got to find somebody who, any job in the world that you could think is like the worst, most boring job. There's probably a person, there's probably some jobs where this isn't the case, but that gets them fired up to do it. They're like, yeah, I love this. It's great. I want to do it. I want to just sit in front of an Excel all day and I'm like, great. Yeah, no, thank you. But so I think, what you talked about prioritizing, I use I put a 2-star and then there can be a few 1-stars. And so every day there can only be 1 2-star thing. And then if that gets done, then I go to the thing that's next, which is like, I'll usually do at any given time, my to-do list will have a 2-star and then 2 1-stars. And it's, if I get done with a 2-star thing, then I go to the next thing. But you can't have, one of my favorite sayings, I don't know if you've ever heard this, is like the word priorities was invented in the 1920s. Prior to 100 years ago, you could only have one priority. One. Their priorities was never meant to be a plural word. And I think in today's day and age, we forget that because we're trying to do so much. And whether it's it is the right thing or not, you can many times just get stuck checking a bunch of mini little boxes. And I'm sure a lot of you are nodding your head right now. Checking a lot of little mini boxes versus, getting the big stuff done. So I think it's just such a great call out. And Nathan, as we start to wrap up, man, I'll kind of ask you the question I asked everyone. What's new and exciting for you? Like, what are trends or things that you're seeing in either your business or your day-to-day that get you excited? That, you're like, hey, Jake, like these are some things I'm seeing, et cetera. So what's like up next or gets you kind of excited for the future?
Yeah, that's a good question. I think, one thing that has been really challenging for us working in manufacturing are all the supply chain headaches and headwinds that you read about in the news and whatnot. And that's been really challenging. I mean, even though we work here locally and manufacture all of our goods in North Carolina, supply chains are very global. Some of our yarn comes from Europe. Our wool originates in a big sheep farm down in Australia. So everything is global. But I think one thing that kind of the silver lining of the past couple of years and something that's really excited me is as I mentioned with our business, we're very about local manufacturing here in the US, and that's something we've been really passionate about. And the silver lining of the past couple of years and some of these supply chain headaches is I think people have really had their eyes open to the importance of domestic manufacturing and trying to reshore as much as possible wherever possible. And I think that's really exciting for us, is seeing how busy some of the mills that we work with have gotten and the renewed interest in, I wouldn't say reversal of what we saw in the late 90s and the early 2000s, but a movement in a very positive direction of some investing in domestic manufacturing. And, like we talked about, that's kind of what our family's done for a really long time. And it's just energizing to see that. And it's extremely exciting. And I think that's, again, the silver lining of kind of the craziness of the past couple of years that's come out of that. So that I would definitely point to that as something that has been really exciting for us.
Love it, man. Well, and I think, we definitely have seen that too. And, we're a B2B consulting firm. And so I think we've seen some of those tendencies as well, which, like you said, is a really good thing to help a lot of people here, home in our home, as well too. So, but that's great, man. Look, I think people are going to get a lot out of your story and your journey. You've done a lot of kind of interesting things, and a lot of your kind of views around, how to stay focused and purpose, but still have that kind of hustle, I think is pretty amazing. Something that our listeners will get a lot out of. So Nathan, thank you so much for joining me today.
Good. Yeah, I appreciate it, Jake. I enjoyed it.
Awesome. All right. Well, thank you again, sir. And we will see all of you next week on the Jake Dunlap Show. Thank you, everyone, again for listening to another episode. If you are listening all the way to the end, I hope you have left a review. I hope that you make sure that you're following or subscribing on your favorite podcast listening apparatus. We'll be back next Thursday. And again, make sure to check out the Monday episodes as well, too. A lot of people are really enjoying these kind of mini episode Mondays. So make sure to tune in, subscribe, and leave a review.